Get it together really quick. Oh. Hi. As most of you know, I'm Erin. I'm Tibor's youngest daughter. My father was the closest person in my life, and I want to share with you my father through my eyes. As he states in his own memoir, these are my stories and the way I see them through my own memory, and I don't claim them to be absolute truths, but just my memories. First, I want to thank you all for being here. It's because of each of you that my dad was who he was, and for that I'm eternally grateful. I am by no means the speaker my father was, but I will do my best to guide you through some of the funny, the sad, the good, the bad, and the amazing life I had with my father. My childhood with my father was something special. I see it different today than I did even a few years ago. I read a quote recently that said, "It's never too late to have a great childhood," and I realized how true that was. I get to remember the stories however I want. I have so many stories about my dad. I could talk for days, but I'll share with you some of my favorites. Since my father passed away in March, I've had Bing Crosby's "You Must Have Been a Beautiful Baby" stuck in my head. But it's my father's voice I hear, the way he sang each word to me as if the song was written just for me. My father wasn't one for traditional nursery rhymes. In fact, he wasn't much for traditional anything. When I was younger, I used to wish he was, but now it's all those unique qualities I cherish the most. My father always called me his little one, and then later, his not so little one. He always made me feel special, from the day I was born until the day he died, and even still. He must have thought I was pretty cute, because he'd always tell me, "Cute is not enough." As most of you know, he even wrote a book about it. He says we wrote the book, but I was just the inspiration. "Cute is not enough" was just one of my favorite Papa-isms. My father was known for his many great sayings. He loved to say, "Lucky in parking, not in love," which I can attest to him being extremely lucky in parking. However, I wouldn't necessarily say he was unlucky in love. In fact, he was able to get the most incredible women in his life, and somehow managed to have some pretty cool kids. I see my father as someone who is surrounded by love. Maybe just not the forever after fairy tale romance he had in mind. I guess that's part of the consequences of being a hopeless romantic. Very early on in my life, my father got the well-earned name, the Fix-It Man, because there just wasn't anything he wouldn't try to fix. His methods were often quite questionable, but he would always make an effort to fix things. I remember my first experience of this. There I am, 5 years old. I walk outside of our Auburn home as I head out for my first solo adventure to play with our dogs, or I play with my bunnies. We had this really big fenced-in dog run where our 3 dogs, Sunny, Ollie, and Fanny, all lived. Inside that yard were many things, like a large 3-door doghouse and my giant bunny cage. So there I go, my happy 5-year-old self, opening the dog gate, closing it behind me, walking to the bunny cage, opening the door, and about to crawl inside, when before I could even say anything or do anything, Sunny, Ollie, and Fanny came storming in behind me. Needless to say, they got to the bunnies before I did. They started tearing my poor bunnies apart, and they stood there screaming in terror. Not even a minute later, Papa comes running into the dog run, screaming. The dogs drop the bunnies and run away. Papa is frantically picking up the bunnies and trying to stop the bleeding by stuffing them with pine straw and whatever else was on the ground. Sadly, he did not fix my bunnies that day, but I learned something very important about my father. I learned that I could always count on my father for anything, even in crisis. And I learned that he would do anything to try to fix it, no matter how unconventional. I was given more from my father than most people get in a lifetime. I was given memories of road trips across the country multiple times in the tiniest Volvo you can ever imagine. As well as trips to Europe, exposure to great musicians, grammar lessons every time I opened my mouth. What child gets to discuss philosophy and religion at the dinner table in grade school? He gave my life something special, something I had no idea would be so important to me as I grew up. Along with all the things my father was, he was my partner. We used to joke, Papa and Erin against the world. My father always supported me, even when he was strongly advised otherwise. He supported me good, bad, against all odds, and no matter what anyone else said. He loved me every day of my life. Most importantly, my father gave me Kate and Thomas. Who would have thought 3 kids from 3 different marriages would end up so close, half-siblings growing up in different houses in different parts of the country? But my dad made his children his #1 priority. Not for himself, but for each of us to have each other. There was nothing half about our relationships. We grew up as a family, and that is priceless. He went above and beyond to have us all together throughout the years. And when I look back on his life today, I have no idea how the man did so much. He was equally passionate in every area of his life. His kids, his work, his romantic relationships, his friendships, and so much more. I don't think anyone thought higher of my father than himself. And even though I joke about this, I actually admire it. I admire him as a constant advocate for himself and for what he believed in. He was a man that stood for everything and didn't spend his life worrying about what others thought. Although I'm sure he offended more people in his lifetime than I could possibly imagine, I also know no one who cared more about his family, his friends, and the condition of the world and humanity as a whole. Throughout my life, I was lucky to be able to sit in many lectures, classrooms, and be in an academic environment. As a child, the Haley Center at Auburn University was my playground. I remember my dad's office so vividly. The books he had, the couch, the briefcase, the old school power bars that tasted like plastic. Being a witness to my dad's career growing up was an honor. I was always proud of his achievements, his fight for what he believed in, and his semi-famous status as a freedom fighter. No one felt as deeply as my father. Every emotion for him was passionate. It made him the most loving, kind, compassionate, sweet man I've ever known. But with that came passionate anger, passionate irritation, and passionate frustration, all the good and all the bad. This was confusing for a long time. How could my father be the most loving and most angry person all at the same time? I get it now. I get his passion for life came in every aspect of his being. He couldn't be one without the other. About 2 years ago, I moved back home after a breakup, and I started to really notice my dad was different. He was forgetting things that didn't seem normal. He was confused a lot, and we began an investigation to see what was wrong. I made a commitment to my dad to help him. I started going to his doctor's appointments, and eventually a new chapter in our life started. A somewhat role reversal started to take place as I realized he wasn't doing as well as I thought. I finally had to get real that something may be wrong with my dad, something I wasn't really willing to face for many years. I wasn't ready to have a father that was sick, but the world doesn't care much what I'm ready for. During that time, I got a new relationship with my father. Call it a breakthrough, call it growing up, calling it being adult, but I got to tell my dad I forgave him, that I was proud to be his daughter, and that I knew he'd done the absolute best he possibly could. And I got to thank him for the amazing life he gave me. I also got to apologize for all the things I was making him wrong for. My dad would get so mad at me and we'd fight, maybe not talk for days. But when I finally would apologize, he wouldn't let me. He'd say, "Oh, Erin, stop it. We fight, then it's over. You're wonderful. You're my little one." Well, my not so little one. Then he'd laugh his famous laugh and we'd go shopping. I made a decision, a thoughtful decision, that my dad spent years and years taking care of me when most times I probably didn't deserve it. So I took this as an opportunity to give back to him by taking care of him. Shortly after my dad retired, things got worse. I remember thinking my whole life my dad would die working. He'd never retire. His life was his work. I think he was scared to retire even though he maybe wouldn't say it. But I knew him better than he knew himself, and I could see it in his behavior. I could see him struggling with getting old and losing his place in a university. Even with his worsening health, my life with my father was still an adventure. Everything from brain surgery UTIs that involved one-way flights out of Cabo, and a somewhat inappropriate incidents he got himself into with home health care nurses. Never a dull moment. When the infamous Tibor email blast started again, I knew he was on the upswing. I started to let go again. I started traveling for work more, and I wasn't giving him the same amount of attention, which he was very vocal about disliking. But I still spoke to him every day. He bought a new car, got solar, and refinanced his house. In perfect Papa fashion, he was back to making questionable financial decisions. In other words, he was back to normal. I had settled on my dad living a long time, basically outliving his money. I decided I had a few years to get my life to the point I could take care of him when this happened, but Papa had a different plan. I remember holding his hand in the hospital when the news came in of the Brussels airport bombings, and all I could think was how heartbroken he'd be to hear and how glad I was he didn't know that happened. I knew how the state of the world scared him. He called me many times in the last couple of months to tell me he was afraid of the condition of the world, of the violence of our presidential candidates, and he always worried. My father spent the last 4 days of his life with his children around him, loving on him, talking to him, sharing stories, and listening to his favorite music. I can't say that it's the way I or he would have wished it, but no matter what, I have to be grateful because I can't imagine he'd have it any other way given the circumstances. When they took him off life support, we laid there with him for over an hour. I curled up on him like I was 12 years old again. Kate curled up by his feet, Thomas next to him holding his hand at his side, and we played his favorite music and told some of our favorite stories. When my dad took his last breath on March 24th at 6:23 p.m., he was listening to his favorite music with his family around him, and it may not be the best, but it's not a bad way to go. There was a quote at the beginning of my dad's memoir, which I am finally reading, that says, "There is only one success, to be able to spend your life your own way." The world is a better place because my dad was in it, and it's not easy living in it without him. But he left us with more in his lifetime than many will ever have. He lived a life worth living. He lived a life of success. Every day I miss him. I miss the 10 phone calls a day. I miss the worrying about him. I miss him calling and saying, "Is it raining there?" even though I live less than 5 miles from him. I really miss him finishing a task, hitting his hand on the table, and proudly saying with declaration, "There." I can see the accomplished smile on his face as he'd hang up the phone or turn off the computer. He'd look at me and say, "There." He did this my entire life, and it was one of our favorite jokes. So I will say with complete declaration, my father was the most amazing man, so in honor of a life well lived,